The Hisense U8G to the left, the Hisense U9DG to the right. Short story, the Hisense U8G loses out in terms of picture quality to the U9DG. In terms of motion, they struggle in similar areas, but overall, the U9DG does have worse motion than the U8G. So, if that's the short answer you're looking for between these two in this comparison, you got it, and you got it in under 30 seconds. So smack a like on this video for just getting to the point. Now we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth on what we're seeing between these two and if the price increase is justified. So I got this image up on the PlayStation 5 of Cloud. I think this is going to really show you the difference between the two. Now, I think anybody who knows anything about these two models knows that the U8G is the brighter unit. However, the brightness is destructive. It is not a benefit. And you're kind of seeing that here as the extra brightness kind of, again, it just makes everything over exaggerated. There's a lot more blooming you'll notice on the character in certain scenes versus this particular television, and it will be far more noticeable. So I'm right now rocking 100 brightness on the U8G, and on the U9DG, I'm rocking 100 brightness as well. So the main takeaway for this particular example is that if you're using 100% brightness, these are going to be very far apart. And in fact, the only way to get the U8G to actually start competing and stop looking so pale is to reduce that brightness and to actually adjust it for the content being displayed versus just throwing it on 100 brightness. So, you know, I know that's something that most people like to do. They like to say, hey, I got a 1500 nit TV. Let's just ramp it up to the max and forget about any kind of accuracy or anything like that. And that's fine, but there is a time and place where you want to make sure that you are dialing things correctly. So I did want to point that out before we get started here. Now, I want to be very clear with you guys. I'm not saying that the U8G's picture is bad by any means. It's actually really close to what we get on the U9DG. And I mean really close in terms of color and clarity. And in some cases, the clarity of the U8G can actually exceed what we get on the U9DG. So I don't want you to hear that, like, even though contrast is better, black levels are better, and some colors are better, that, like, it's just a loss for the U8G. I will say from a color accuracy perspective, though, I do tend to prefer the U9DG because the cyan on the U8G has always veered towards green. And again, that's post-calibration, and you can see it clear as day because the U9DG does not have that problem in the slightest. So I do find that to be interesting. These are little things that, like, I mean, if you're not calibrating, like most people probably won't, you won't notice. But again, it is something to note as like a difference here as far as like color. Because, you know, if a dress is supposed to look cyan and then it ends up having a greenish hue to it, it's going to be pretty obvious. Now, another thing that I want to draw your attention to is motion, because I said that the U8G has slightly better motion, and I really do mean slightly better motion. It's not like day and night better, but it is better by a little bit. So the motion on the U9DG will be talked about at length in its own separate video, but for now, just take away that the motion on the U8G is definitely what I prefer. Now, in this instance here, I kind of want to run this back and just kind of show you what I'm talking about, because there are moments where, like I was saying, even like color accuracy can get a little bit better on the U8G versus the U9DG. If we look here, we can see that the purple looks so much better, and really the whole scene overall looks so much better on the U8G versus the U9DG. It's one of those weird things where, like, when you get to the additive colors, sometimes the U9DG doesn't look quite as good. It targets a darker purple, a more muted purple, things like that. The blue also is something I've noticed, and that's a key primary. However, the overall pop and contrast in the scene is superior than what we are getting on the U8G. So the U9DG definitely still is kicking ass in some areas as well. But I find, if I'm being honest with you, they are just entirely way too close. Like, I mean, like, if I look at this image, yes, the purple on the U8G is incredible. The blue, I mean, I honestly, if I'm being honest with you, I do prefer the look of the U8G a little bit more. But sometimes, like I was saying, it does go back and forth. But my thing is, because the U8G is so similar, I feel like for like the extra increase in price, the U9DG should have destroyed the U8G to such a level where they're not even close. They're not even in the same realm or same stratosphere, and you could never mistake one for the other. And I think when you don't have that as a case and situation, that's where things start getting a little messy, because now it's just kind of like, okay, you're paying more, but is more better? And again, one of the things you'll notice is even post calibration, it's so weird, this TV, because sometimes the colors look right. Like, you know, how do I explain this in a way that makes sense? If you guys remember in the opening of this video, it was a disparaging difference between those two cloud pictures. But now as you look, there's a disparaging difference here where like the blue is like really dark and like overly cool. And it's hard because it's kind of one of those things where it's like you can argue that maybe on a rainy day, it's more accurate for it to be a cool color temperature versus warm light. But then you can argue that the warm light coming from the ambient environment, like from behind the character, is what's making the U8G a little bit more warm. It's one of those things that like a purist is going to really pick apart, but the average person wouldn't think twice about. And the point with this is there are moments like now in this particular scene where the U8G slaughters the overall image quality you're getting on the U9DG. And to a point where you look at the U9DG, right? And the U9DG, I'm noticing because you have the additive benefit of black levels, it is darker, but that appears to crush the lower parts of a grayscale, IRE, you know, the blackest parts, the near black parts of the image. And it doesn't look as appealing visually as what we have on the U8G. And I feel like, again, for the money, that might maybe not be the best for you to kind of go through. And again, everybody has their own answer, but like for this scene in particular, I do pick the U8G. Now we're going to switch it up a bit and we're going to go to something else now. The accuracy is way better on the U9DG in terms of highlight placement, contrast, mapping. It's like three-dimensional, where the U8G is more two-dimensional by far. The problem though is that it's hard to show some of these differences in luminosity. Now, if you're thinking like I'm thinking, right? They're outdoors, they're in a darker environment. You want that darker shadow to be cast. And then you don't really want everything to look overly bright. Like his face now looks really pale on the U8G. I mean, he almost looks like a Caucasian person. I mean, that's not really what they were going for. They were going with like kind of like a mixed race kind of person for this individual. And he just looks like really washed out on the U8G. So it's weird because in some instances on the U8G, color accuracy, bang on, wonderful, defeats the U9DG. But then it gets to moments like this in the darkest parts of the scene, and you're really seeing where dual cell has its benefit, right? You're seeing where in the darkest parts of an image, it's able to not be an OLED, but essentially find the darker parts of the image where it should be dark and keep them dark enough to where you're getting the depth, you're getting the immersion, and more importantly, you're getting the color accuracy. So I think from that perspective, Hisense really nailed it. Now, again, the U8G is the brighter between the two televisions, but brightness, in my opinion, doesn't really matter if you can't nail the accuracy part of it. And I think that's something that Hisense is going to really have to work on as time goes on. I mean, take these two images. They couldn't be more far apart. I mean, they look like two entirely different people with how just very off the color balance is from one versus the other. And that's the thing. Now, the camera is not going to show you 100% of what I'm seeing. That's just how these things play out. But I'm telling you, it gets so very different. From a contrast perspective, this is one of those scenes I played back at least 1,000 times. And this is where I really saw the benefit of the luminance panel kind of coming into play in tandem with the color panel that they have. It looks so very good. I mean, if you look at this particular image, the U8G, again, almost looks pale by comparison. And again, it's not like either one is a bad image. It's just one looks worse than the other. And now, to be very fair, I used the U8G the way most people would use them. I didn't put in like my absolute juggernaut monster comparison-esque, if you will, settings for one reason. Because I need you to see how everyday people are going to look at this TV and what everyday people are going to do first. Now, to be fair, it is calibrated, but again, at least a general realm of settings that everyday people are going to use. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because the U8G can get a lot closer to the image of the U9DG, if we start getting creative, and I'll show you what it looks like. Using motion clearness, you can bridge the gap between these two TVs pretty darn substantially, and I think it's one of those things that go underutilized because a lot of people don't want the extra decreased brightness. But as you're seeing, if you do that, the two become a lot more identical to one another. Now, color temperature is one of those things that the U9DG still does better, but the contrast of the U8G hits another tier and stratosphere altogether. Now, I have settings showing you guys how to do that. You have to become a member, join up, snag those settings. A lot of members already have those settings, but I'm telling you right now, like, the creativity part of things is very important in the AV community. However, to be fair, being creative will not mitigate certain benefits. Now, on the camera, it appears overly bright, but in real life, as you look at it with your naked eye, you're going to see that the U8G or the U9DG to the right is going to have a lot more in the way of luminosity and just a very natural looking image. And I don't know if I can really show that off because they are two different exposure levels, these TVs, so it's very difficult to show one versus the other and get them both accurately exposed. So bear with that, I suppose. I mean, I'll do the best I can, but I mean, I'm losing detail, and I see myself losing detail in one versus the other. So it's one of those things you're going to have to be patient with. I don't know what the final product's going to look like, so I'll just leave it here. But I will say that the U9DG looks significantly better as far as this picture goes, because you get the glow, the luminosity in her face, you get the armor, everything. Now, again, it looks like an overblown mess on camera because it can't meter for two displays, and all that means in English is if one display is brighter than the other display, you are not going to be able to see exactly what the differences are between these two displays. So that's why I really don't like side-by-side comparisons without commentary, because it does get pretty misleading. Okay, but the point being is that you guys can see there is a very big difference in luminosity. I mean, look at this scene. It's just day and night. Now, this one is the one that let me see the biggest difference between the two and understand the algorithm a lot better on how the U9DG was making an image. You see, a lot of people, rtings.com, Digital Trends, will tell you that it's a dim TV, it's just dim. The U8G is substantially brighter. However, again, we know that brightness is destructive. Now, from a clarity perspective, as you are clearly seeing on this image, they're both identical, but it gets very impressive because the U9DG is able to break out an extra highlight. I'll try to lower my ISO so you can see it a little bit better. I don't know how much you can see it. Just in the center, you can see the center bulb a lot better on the U9DG. It doesn't look like it on camera, but I'm telling you right now, it looks way better. Like 10 times better easily on the U9DG. And with the luminance behind it, it looks a lot more like what you're supposed to have. Now, I'll go ahead and turn off the clearness feature on the U8G so you can see what that looks like with the brightness. Now, if you look at both of these images, again, they look day and night different, but this is what it looks like when you turn off the clearness feature. And again, it's one of those things where for me, I don't really like this look. It's just overly bright, but a lot of people will just run to putting their brightness at 100. So again, I can't stress the importance of proper highlight placement. And the U9DG does that. So while yes, the global brightness or the full screen brightness of the U8G to the left is obviously way bigger, it's just souring the picture because the backlight and the diffusers are not really doing an efficient job with the local dimming algorithm of darkening things like clouds, pans, the contrast around the bike, and again, the light sources like you see tightly mapped on the U9DG. Now, again, like I was saying, you're going to hear that this is a dimmer TV. However, where they put the brightness is intelligently placed. And I feel like it's a bit disingenuous to just say, oh, it's overly dim, without giving it the credit for being what it is, good at what it does. And that's the proper highlight placement. But I want to show you something interesting. What would you do if I told you the U9DG to the right could actually get brighter than what we have on the left with the U8G? Well, it can. Hisense, for whatever reason, with their local dimming algorithm, ties in brightness. So if you're using high, you're going to get the deepest black levels and the strongest contrast. And to be honest, this is the contrast level that will be closest to something like, let's say, an OLED. To be very clear and to clarify for all those out there wondering, no, this is no replacement for OLED at all, but it definitely still has contrast similar to what an OLED would be able to produce. But the brightness is tied to medium. If you select medium, Look at how much brighter that just got. And you'll be able to see the fluctuation in the brightness levels when you go from high, which dims down, it's a very visible change, to medium. I mean, you get so much more of that luminosity. And notice where they're putting the luminosity now. It isn't doing what the U8G to the left is doing. Notice how the whole screen on the U8G is blown out. Our backlight is set to 100 on the U8G. So the global brightness is pretty much destructive. We know that. We can clearly see that. It's souring parts of the image we don't want soured. Cool. So then when we go to local dimming and it's set to high, we don't want that. What we want to do is we want to go to something like medium. And again, notice how the headlight gets brighter. The reflections from the headlight, the light trails get brighter. You know what I mean? That is what you want. That is intelligent algorithm processing, which is allowing you to be able to hone in on specific areas of an image versus just a global brightening. Notice how the pans are still rich and dark versus, being overly washed out and turning gray. These are the key changes that make the price a little bit more worth it over the step down model. Now I'm going to let this scene play and I'm going to let you guys see for yourself the difference between global brightness at 100 to the left versus properly tuned brightness to the right, where it's finding areas of the screen that should be bright and it's brightening those areas up while keeping the dark areas dark. Again, it's this kind of intelligent processing that makes a high-end TV higher than a lower-end TV. You can see a lot more. Again, not saying the U8G isn't high-end, but I'm saying there are differences you are going to notice from a processing perspective. A perspective that is sidestepped, is underlooked, or overlooked, and is not mentioned. And I think is a damn shame because when you really look at it, it does have a benefit to it. And I think, again, if you're somebody who wants that nice tight placement of lights, like, all the little, subway lights or whatever they're driving through here, you can kind of see all of that way tighter on the TV to the left or to the right because it's doing a better job with algorithmic processing. Let's just pause it here, right? I mean, look at the trail. Now, the U8G is brighter, so you're going to get the luminosity throw and kick, which looks incredible, and the detail is pretty immaculate. However, if you look at the contrast and the clarity coming off of the image to the right, it just looks better. And because they're not applying a general global brightness, you can notice colors like greens and things like Cloud's outfit and the girl's outfit behind them, that they're just going to appear better and richer. Even the same thing with the red. It's going to appear richer because you're not overexposing the image and adding too much brightness. And that's just what happens when you use 100 brightness on something like the U8G. Now let's go ahead and turn it back down and get it back to a level where it can compete again. Now as we move over to skin tones, this is going to be extremely difficult to show off because, well, it's a metering for a different level of brightness between both TVs. And also, you have a really hard time picking up the color red accurately, so some things are going to look off, but I'll walk you through the differences here. Essentially, the U8G is far more capable, in my personal opinion, because once you start targeting that lower level of brightness, you're able to draw out more contrast details and things like that. And honestly speaking, I just find it to be a lot more aesthetically pleasing with a lot more headroom to grow than what we have on the U9DG. Like I was saying, some instances color accuracy could look way better. Well, this is one of those instances, as you see. I mean, it's like a day and night difference between the two images. Now, again, I can probably go in and get it to the same level, but essentially I also look for things like clarity, and they both look very similar, but there also is a level of, again, pixel degradation because you're not using a smaller display. And anytime you're going larger, you're going to throw away some resolution. And so that is something that I am feeling here. But in terms of showing you the accurate levels of light to dark, it's just not going to happen because the U9DG is brighter, and that's going to play a role in what we see here. But overall, I do prefer the look of the U8G. If you're looking at something with landscapes, it's going to be, I guess, a personal preference kind of thing. The U9DG tries to make everything kind of like saturated and vibrant, and you do see a decent amount of gradations as they go from one end of the spectrum to the other, and you do have a stronger highlight that pops over the horizon because it's just honing in on the brightest part of the screen and trying to keep the rest dark. As you can kind of see, the U8G looks grayer by comparison, but honestly speaking, I still prefer the look of the U8G in this instance because it looks more accurate and like you would see if you're outdoors. Now, both have substantial banding, and I think that's something that you should be aware of because for a high-end TV in this price range, I mean, I think you should have smooth gradation. So that's something that they're going to have to work on. So yeah, I mean, it's tit for tat. It really is. But it's one of those things that like few people are gonna maybe be able to see a benefit of changing without enough feedback. And sadly, this TV isn't really that popular. So I don't really know if that's something that could be patched out, fixed with anything. So I know people always say like, hey, maybe the banding can be fixed with an update. Probably not, because that's pretty much a software-based issue. So all in all, both TVs are very competent and they both do a good job at what they do. I mean, it like I was saying, once you start dialing in the U8G, the U8G gets way too close to the U9DG in my personal opinion. So it's hard because it's like, while technically, yes, the U9DG does beat the U8G in a lot of areas like luminance control, black levels by far, you know, just clarity and contrast in general. Yeah, sure. In a lot of instances, the U9DG pulls ahead and becomes the winner, but the U8G is so close, and honestly, it surpasses it in examples like this now, where we have fireworks on the screen, that it doesn't, I don't know, this is a weird TV, right? The U9DG does some weird, funky stuff sometimes, and it's hard because it's like, on the one end of the spectrum, it has no blooming. Right now, I see blooming on the U8G, as especially the fireworks are on the black background. But it's kind of like, I mean, you really got to determine how important something like that is to you, and also, I mean, I don't know, it's very weird. Like when you do comparisons like these, you've really got to try to find like a common denominator between these two and like what makes them truly special. And I can say like both are great TVs, but like the U8G is just, from an affordability perspective to the image quality that's hitting, I don't care what anyone says, at the U9DG level, then I'd say this is what it is. Because right now, for those that don't know, I'm playing this video off of YouTube right now. It's my personal video, and the reason I'm doing this is to test upscaling capabilities of low bitrate content. And I'm telling you right now, man, like it's just the U9DG is just not capable of better upscaling, higher end upscaling. And again, it's just like it's so similar to like the muddy images we see on some step down models as far as the clarity of that kind of stuff. And you still have banding, and you know, motion is better on the U8G. And it just, again, at the end of the day, personally, what I feel like is like, why would you buy the U9DG for the U8G's existence, you know, being on the market? I mean, I think if you buy the U9DG, you're buying it because you want a 75-inch U8G more or less, and you're okay with taking the hit on motion, because that's the problem with this TV for anybody wondering. Motion. And again, I'm going to really have to cover it and be very specific and thorough, which I'll do in a separate video so we don't take up too much time. But yeah, that's your deal breaker here. And I'm telling you right now, I've tried everything and it's definitely the motion. Also, I'm noticing a lot more little pixelated little things. You guys won't be able to see that on camera, but it's way more pixelated, like almost like little square digital thinking artifacts. So yeah, that's kind of like trash in my personal opinion, because it's like the U8G doesn't have that. And I'm enjoying the picture on the U8G. And I feel like, again, for the money, I'm going to say the U8G would be my personal winner. But from a technical perspective, if we're being fair and honest from a technical perspective, I guess the U9DG does win. Color accuracy is there, and like, you know, more of the scientific stuff. So if you're like a little bit more of an image purist in the sense that you want stuff to be a lot closer to reference accurate, you want them to highlight map correctly, you want, you know, better placements over highlights without losing brightness, then the U9DG is going to be better. But again, I don't know, man. I'm a U8G guy. That's just my thing. I think it's a better TV, and that's where I sit personally. But from a scientific perspective, again, U9DG. But let me know what you guys think. Ask your questions down below. And as always, thanks so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. Until the next video, I'll see you guys later.